This pensions webinar brought to you by the pensions team at Gowling WLG. I'm Ian Chapman-Curry and I'm a legal director specialising in new and developing areas of law. In this webinar we'll be focusing on the global coronavirus pandemic and the impact it's having on the pensions industry. In particular, we'll be looking at some of the practical steps that trustees can take to make sure that they are best placed to deal with these incredibly unusual times. I don't need to spend much time introducing the subject matter of this webinar. At the end of 2019, the World Health Organization's China office heard the first reports of a previously unknown virus behind a number of unusual pneumonia cases in Wuhan, a city in the central Hubei province. Since then, coronavirus and COVID-19, the disease caused by the coronavirus, have become a global public health crisis on a scale not seen since the Spanish flu of 1918 to 19. On the most up-to-date figures from Johns Hopkins University, there have been 472,109 confirmed cases of COVID-19 across the world. This has resulted in 21,308 deaths. On a more positive note, 114,870 people have recovered, and that's the latest figures as at 8 o'clock on the 26th of March 2020. All of this has created a crisis response by governments across the world. In the UK, the Prime Minister announced on the 24th of March a series of severe restrictions aimed at curbing rates of infection and on easing the pressure on the National Health Service. The main message for people was to stay at home to avoid unnecessary journeys or social contact. There were exceptions to this, including being able to leave home for essential shopping or medical needs, to take one form of exercise per day, or travelling to work if that was absolutely necessary. The government is implementing a ban on gatherings of more than 2 people who are in unrelated households, and this is going to be enforced by the police with the power to issue fines and disbursement notices. So we're in a state of business, but not business as usual. Unsurprisingly, the impact on the economy has been profound. The IHS Market Flash UK Purchasing Managers Composite Index provides an indication of business confidence across the country's manufacturing and service sectors. Any figure above 50 in the survey indicates growth, and a figure below 50 suggests a contraction in economic activity. In January, the economy rebounded from a pre-election slump to record a positive 52.7 score. This was improved in February, with momentum picking up following the UK's departure from the European Union with a score of 53. In March, however, the impact of the coronavirus is shown by a remarkably low score of 37.6, and this suggests that the UK is heading for a sharp recession. All of this has been reflected in the performance of the markets, with some of the most turbulent trading on global equity markets. Just as an indication of the general health of the UK equities markets, the FTSE 250 has fallen from a peak of over 22,000 points to a low of 12,289, a fall of over 40%. But it's important to note that it has recovered some of that loss in the past few days. So the government's advice has been clear: stay at home, protect the NHS and save lives. These are necessary to curb the pandemic and to avoid overflowing the National Health Service, but they are of course not conducive to economic activity. In the Prime Minister's address, the Prime Minister noted a number of businesses would have to close, and these include restaurants, pubs, cafes, nightclubs, hairdressers, all retail other than the essentials, hotels, bingo halls, casinos and betting shops, gyms, fitness studios and swimming pools. Basically, whole swathes of the UK economy have been closed overnight. And the impact isn't just limited on the businesses that have been closed. There are other sectors that are seeing profound impacts as a result of the coronavirus crisis: aviation, transport in general, real estate, construction, all of those things. So what has been the impact on pensions? Well, first of all, let's have a look at what the pensions regulator has said. The pensions regulator has issued a note which it promises to keep updated. You can get the pension regulator's note at tinyurl.com/TPR COVID. At the moment, what the pensions regulator is saying is that trustees need to focus on the key things. Top of these is that benefits need to continue to be paid, and this is particularly crucial if you think about the millions of old age people who are currently self-isolating and not able to leave the house. There is a huge amount of fear and concern, and non-payment of pensions would only materially add to that. The pensions regulator is also alive to the risk of scams, of pensions liberation, of fraud. People will be faced with some pretty desperate times if they've lost jobs, if they've been self-employed. Only yesterday we received confirmation that over 500,000 people registered for income support, a huge, staggering material increase on the usual rate of applications, and so many people will be feeling particularly financially pressed, and unfortunately there will always be people who try to take advantage of these situations. Another important aspect is the pensions regulator emphasising that employers need to continue to contribute towards their schemes, both for the paying of pensions in accrual and also for deficit repair contributions. Another aspect of this that the pensions regulator is emphasising is that savers will need support to make good decisions in the challenging circumstances. And this is especially focused on those with money purchase benefits, so either in defined contribution schemes or sections, or with additional voluntary contributions that are invested. People may have looked at the performance of their pension investments over the past few weeks and been dismayed at the precipitous decline in value. One thing that needs to be emphasised is pension saving is for the long term, and it is not generally a good idea for people to take rash decisions in the wake of high market turbulence on the stock markets. And finally, the pensions regulator has acknowledged that this is an incredibly unusual time for pensions and for the wider economy. It's noted that in extremis some administrative breaches of the law may occur, and it's promised to maintain a proportionate and fair approach to any action that they take in terms of enforcement. And it's important here to note that this isn't a carte blanche for trustees, employers and administrators to say that the rules no longer apply. It's just that the pensions regulator is saying that it will be mindful that there may be some extreme and extraneous circumstances which explain some of the breaches of law which may occur. So let's unpack that in a bit more detail and look at what the expectations are of trustees. Explain that it has a series of expectations of trustees at this time, and top of that list is a focus on business continuity. TPR wants trustees to be alive to the risks that would have significant consequences for your schemes and for your members. So they want you to look at your business continuity plans and think about whether they're still adequate. Contact your administrators and service providers, whether they're in-house or third parties, and find out what contingency plans are in place to mitigate the impact of increases in work volumes, spikes in member communications, or unavailable staff. The pensions regulator is also mindful that this is going to be a period of intense pressure on trustees and employers, so it wants trustees to think about prioritising the key activities that need to be prioritised in the event that there is a lack of resource. So focusing on pensioner payments, retirement processing and bereavement payments. Trustees are encouraged to set out a priority order with administrators and providers and work with them closely if there are any issues with providing these essential core activities. TPR also wants trustees to be alive to the issues of corporate distress. If you're the trustees of defined benefit schemes and your sponsoring employer is at risk or has asked you to reduce or suspend the scheme's deficit repair contributions, TPR encourages you to read the guidance on corporate distress, and we would encourage you to get in touch with your advisors, with your client service team to discuss this in more detail. As hinted before, the pensions regulator is alive to the issue of scams. Savers who are made unemployed or who are previously self-employed and no longer able to work might increasingly look to transfer their pensions, prompted by issues of needing to get hold of cash, and that means they are very attractive prospects for scammers who might attempt to lure them to so-called safe havens. So if savers start asking you about transferring pensions, you need to exercise extreme caution, and you need to follow all of the steps set out around scams, and also to visit ScamSmart, which has a specific page of guidance relating to COVID-19. As always, trustees should also signpost members to the Money and Pensions Service, and particularly focusing on those who are approaching retirement and whose pension may have been affected by the current economic conditions. TPR is also thinking about administrators. COVID-19 threatens to place huge additional pressures on the administration of pension schemes. Administrators should focus on prioritising the payment of benefits, retirement processing and bereavement services, as well as the administrative functions that underpin and support these. You should focus on the processes you need to ensure accurate benefits, so the investment of contributions. The pensions regulator has said that they understand that many non-critical trustee and member services may be affected. For example, it's alive to the fact that you may have to delay responding to member queries or even in producing annual benefit statements. TPR does want trustees and administrators to report to TPR if they believe they're unable to pay member benefits. That's a key thing. If there is any chance that you are unable to pay member benefits, the pensions regulator requires you to report that to them immediately. It then wants you to report anything else as normal, which means the trustees or administrators considering whether it's a material concern with which they need to report to the pensions regulator with the assurance that the pensions regulator has promised to take a pragmatic approach in their response. And finally, the pensions regulator has focused on employers. As highlighted in the earlier part of this presentation, we know this is an incredibly challenging time for employers, for the sponsors of pension schemes, and the strain this is putting on employers. The sheer financial strain on cash reserving, the amount of money that's available, especially for businesses that are used to having a steady flow of cash coming into the business, businesses in the retail sector that suddenly find themselves closed. The government has published an extensive range of information about support for employers, employees and businesses affected by COVID-19. Trustees should be discussing this with their advisors if they have concerns, and also, when appropriate, discussing it with the employers themselves. And finally, some other impacts. These ones more impacts on the pensions regulator itself. The pensions regulator has confirmed that it's postponing a raft of the work that it had undertaken in terms of rolling out new regulatory initiatives. So the pensions regulator has issued its much delayed code of practice on defined benefit funding, and that has been postponed, although we do think it's important for trustees to stay on top of that, because we do know that that is the eventual direction for travel, and it would be good for trustees to be prepared for that when that comes back onto the agenda. The pensions regulator's long-term strategy launch has also been postponed, along with pausing of other regulatory initiatives. Basically, the pensions regulator is suspending the policy work and the rollout of regulatory initiatives to ensure that it can maintain one-to-one and relationship supervision and engage in rapid response work on the expectation that there will be significant calls on the pensions regulator's time because of employers in distress. So what else do trustees need to think about? What are some practical steps that can help trustees carry on business as near to normal in these highly unusual circumstances? And we've thought about some additional things that aren't highlighted yet in the pension regulator's guidance. One of the things is getting ready for meetings to be held remotely. The scene that's just pictured on the slide is something that will become increasingly familiar to people as video conferencing becomes the new normal. The pensions team at Gowling WLG has been able to test its own video conferencing facilities to the extreme, having 60 people plus on a single Zoom call for team meetings, which do seem to actually be working quite well. So one of the things that trustees might want to think about is whether trustee meetings can be held remotely. They do not necessarily have to be held in person, but there has to be provisions in place in relevant governing documents that allow meetings to be held by electronic or by telephone or video conference. And these powers will usually be set out in the trust company's articles of association, if you have a corporate trustee, or in the scheme's trust deed and rules, if you have individual trustees. And if this isn't clear to you, then ask your scheme lawyer, ask your client service team for more information on this. It's also important that trustees need to think about how they can continue to take decisions, how they can continue to execute contracts and deeds that need to be signed. Trustees may want to consider the increased prospect of key person risk. So some specific things for trustees to think about. It might be useful to designate a reserve chair, either of the main board or of subcommittees or of all of these bodies in the event that any of the chairpersons are taken ill with COVID-19. Quoracy should also be at the back of the mind. Meetings need to be quorate, and so trustees should remind themselves of what the quoracy requirements, and again, if you need any assistance on that, you should contact your client service team to find out more on that. Delegations and powers. It's a good time to check that the scheme's delegations and powers are up to date and effective in the event that trustees are not able to take an active part in trustee decision making. Finally, in terms of this group of practical things, trustees should be thinking about looking at authorised signatory lists. So those lists that are maintained of people who have the authority to sign on behalf of the trustees. These are usually maintained with investment managers, and making sure that there are up-to-date authorised signatory lists and that everyone knows what the backup plans are if any of the authorised signatories are no longer available. To bring all of this together, trustees might want to have some pre-agreed actions, such as the formation of an emergency response committee or having standby trustee candidates ready to fill vacancies, whether on a temporary or a permanent basis, if there are gaps in the trustee board caused by illness in relation to COVID-19. So you can find out an awful lot more about this. We have an insight on this issue which you can get hold of at tinyurl.com/GWLG COVID-19. We've also put together a trustee checklist, which is a really handy two-side guide at very high level, going through different practical points that you can consider and also record whether you've taken any actions. So it acts as both a useful checklist but also could be a very useful governance tool to record the actions that trustees have taken to prepare and mitigate any impact that COVID-19 has on the scheme. And finally, COVID-19 is obviously having a much wider impact across the whole swathe of the economy and society and in various legal areas. Experts from around the world at Gowling WLG and from all practice areas and service groups are coming together to produce an extraordinary range of material on COVID-19. Some of the best of this has been brought together in our COVID-19 guide, and you can get hold of a copy of this at tinyurl.com/GWLG COVID guide. If you need any of those resources, you can contact your client service team, or please feel free to contact me. I'm Ian Chapman Curry, a legal director in the pensions team at Gowling WLG. My contact details are on screen there, and the slides will be available for you to download. Also, if you have any practical questions or if there's anything that you want to discuss in more detail, please do contact your client service team or pick up the phone. I'd be happy to discuss those with you. We're maintaining a running list of the practical and legal issues that are arising as a result of COVID-19, covering a whole range of things from requests to suspend employer contributions to dealing with spikes in member queries, and looking at whether force majeure clauses have impacts and what happens if the trustee is an investor in real estate and people are suddenly saying they're refusing to pay rent. It really is producing a raft of issues across the board, and we're maintaining an up-to-date list so that we can look at having consistent house views across the team and making sure that you get the benefit of the thinking of the entire Gowling WLG pensions team. So for the moment, that's all from us. I'm Ian Chapman-Curry. This has been a pensions webinar brought to you by the pensions team at Gowling WLG. Until next time, stay safe and please do stay in touch.